Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Meiser Sheni, Pedikei, Halacha Dalet. We are learning Daf Nun Hey. We left off on Daf Nun Hey, Amud Aleph, all the way on top, in the beginning of the Gemara, in the middle of the top line. So first of all, in the Mishnah we had, you can call it a machlokes or the Mishnah related that historically, initially, Mishnah Rishayna, part of biur meant that even if someone had unprocessed produce that didn't even reach the place in which it's called tevel, in which the owner is chayev to be toidem uma'aser, still that person, because of the obligation of biur, was obligated to bring that item into its gemar malacha state and to tithe it and to do biur, whatever biur would mean, to make sure that the recipients receive that which was separated for them, or in the case of Meiser Sheni, to burn it because it was not consumed up until the time of the biur. Rabbi Akiva, and he changed that. Rabbi Akiva's understanding, and that's going to be the halacha, that if something is not even in the state of tevel, it's not included in the obligation of biur. So we're going to begin today's daf by learning more about that, about Shitas Rabbi Akiva, what we infer from the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. We're going to go back to the way things used to be. We're going to quote a Braisa that will really elaborate. Part of that elaboration will touch upon the topic of Ibur Shana. And if we'll have time, we're going to go into the Rambam's Kiddush HaChodesh a little bit today and review the way the Rambam formulates, the way Beis Din would be ma'aber the shana, the way we use the reasons, the hierarchy of different types and weights of reasons to be ma'aber a shana, which would mean to add a 13th month, which would dafka be Adar, to make it the year into a leap year. That will be the first topic of today's share. The next topic of today's share will be regarding the story that the Mishnah related regarding Rabban Gamliel and the Chachamim, or the Zekenim that were with him, that the type of kinyan that they made to make sure that the recipients received the Truma and the Meiser and the Trumas Meiser and the Meiser Ani was either, like we said, the Gemara really in Babli, in Bava Metzia, has a machlokes, whether it functions as kinyan chatzir, so they rented out a parcel of land upon which the produce was laying, and through kinyan chatzir, the recipient acquired it, or kinyan agav. That means that when they made the kinyan to be koina, the karka, the rental of the land through kesef is koina karka, one of the three kinyanim for karka, together with that agav, the karka came along the metaltal, one or the other. And the Gemara is going to really touch here, as we had in Bava Metzia, Babli, Daf Yud Aleph, the question, why wasn't kinyan chalipin used? The Gemara in Babli is a lot more elaborated. There's a lot more in the Gemara there. I'll quote some of the Gemara in Babli when we conclude the sugya. The focus, is about why not kinyan chalipin, but the ikar focus here in the Yerushalmi is that l'chu'ura, what they did should not have worked, as we'll see. And the Gemara says it did work. Obviously, it worked. The Gemara will explain why it worked. That will be the second topic. And the third topic of today's daf is going to be the opening of a sugya that will, God willing, continue into tomorrow's daf. And that is the following, that there is a criteria needed for someone to be able to be a shliach, an agent, to perform an act of acquisition on behalf of the other. And that is that the shliach has to be betoiras, whatever it is that he's going to serve as a shliach for. For example, as lamashal, if someone would like to divorce one's wife, an eved is unable to serve as a shliach. Why? So the Gemara says that's the lashon, that since ein ho'eved, since an eved is not betoiras gitten v'kedushin, so ein ha'eved nasa shliach lekabel get. Just a mush. And valderach zelahala, that in order for someone to be able to represent the other, to be a shliach, to act on their behalf, and we're going to be focusing on dinei kinyanim, the shliach has to be betoiras, that type of kinyan. To what extent is a machlokes amoraim, and I'll leave it at that in the words of introduction. And it's going to be really fascinating. The linking of this sugya to our Mishnah will be left for tomorrow's daf, but we're going to open up with this. That will be the third and the final topic in today's daf. So Chavra daf nun hey amud aleph, all the way on top. Again, not before. Let's go with Rabbi Akiva first. That Achaba Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva said that no, that if produce did not even reach the tithing stage, then it's not subject to beer. Now, there is an implication in what Rabbi Akiva says, the way the words are formulated in the Mishnah, that once produce did reach the tithing stage, so once you have, for example, by grain the meruach, even though the person did not yet take off the truma, nevertheless, since it reached that stage, it is subject to beer. So says the Gemara, asks the Gemara, hold on. Even later, after Rabbi Akiva introduced what is now the halacha, v'loi tevelhu, if the person de facto did not yet remove the truma or the meiser, even though it reached the stage of it being fully processed, still, why don't you argue here as well? Why is it subject to beer? L'cha'ira, beer means that since you already did the separation, but you didn't yet give it to its proper recipient, including you eating your ma'aser sheni in Yerushalmi, there's a line, there is a limit. And now it has to reach the recipient or it has to be destroyed. But you didn't even tithe it yet. So why didn't Rabbi Akiva go all the way? Why didn't Rabbi Akiva say that unless the trumas and maasros were actually separated, then there is no din of beer yet? So the Gemara answers the Gemara, explains the Gemara b'shitas Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Hila, b'shem Shmuel, zoy meres. I'll tell you why. Because really in Parshas Kisavai, in the Chumash, when we are learning about the dinim of beer, the Torah is telling us what the person has to say in their vidui that is done because they did the beer, and the words, or some of the words that are said is bi'arti hakodesh min habayis. Okay, that means that I did beer on that which is holy from my home. I gave the truma to the kohen, or I burnt the ma'aser sheni. So the beer has to be done to that which is called kodesh. So says the Gemara, from here you see that tevel is called kodesh, which is amazing. But you would argue, no, truma is kodesh. I know that ma'aser rishon has no inherent kedusha. Doesn't matter. But you separated the ma'aser rishon. It's included in the word kodesh. I'll tell you more. Even tevel is called kodesh. Or let me say the words that we used yesterday, that we have followed the opinion that even though you were not toidem, matanoi shaloi hurmu is kemisha hurmu dami. We spoke on the machlekes rishonim how to understand the isur of eating tevel. Some rishonim learn the reason why you can't eat tevel because in the tevel there's truma. Other rishonim learn that tevel is a ingen b'fnei atzmai. But be that as it may, the term kodesh, it refers even to tevel. So therefore, even though you did not yet separate the trumas from maasros, holds Rabbi Akiva, now that it reached the stage of maasros, it's already called kodesh. Okay, so now that we explained Shitas, Rabbi Akiva, now we're going to go back a little bit to elaborate how things used to be. Prior to the change that was instituted by Rabbi Akiva, we collectively held that even if a person had items that did not reach their final stage, nevertheless, you're chayiv to do beer. And therefore, what happened, the Jewish culture, that Beis Din would issue reminders to the people, I don't know how early or prior to Erev Pesach, let's say 30 days or whatever the time was, maybe part of what happened on the Rosh Chodesh Adar, even though the Mishnah says what happened on the Rosh Chodesh Adar, whatever that was, to remind people, listen, prepare your unprocessed produce, which means process it, tithe it, and then distribute it. And now we quote a Braisa, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Vaitena Maisa, Maisa berabbi Gamliel v'Hazakenim, which is fascinating, and could even be maybe that the reason why Rabbi Gamliel and the Zakenim were the ones that did what they did is because of what happened to them in the Mishnah. That they once found themselves on the boat and they chapped, and it was either before Pesach the 4th or the 7th, and they realized that they got to do beer. In other words, they themselves experienced that we could forget, we can go on a trip and things that were unforeseen can happen, you know. They knew that people have to be reminded. And now there are different versions exactly where they were sitting, which is very consequential, not Negeya here, but very consequential. Either they were sitting on the steps of the Ulam. That's one version. That's a little bit problematic because sitting over there and writing letters, even for communal needs, is lav dafka something that one is allowed to do. You're talking about being inside the holy temple area. So the other gears, and the one that we're going to go with, is that they were sitting al mailos maharabayis, certain steps on Temple Mount, wherever they were. The way that Rambam describes it, right at the periphery, you had all these covered areas, but there were steps on the harabais. Let's go with that. They were sitting over there, and who was with them? V'hoyo Yochanan HaKohen, HaSofer Halaz. There was a well-known scribe that was needed to write down and to send letters. Yoshev Lifneim, and the Rabbi Gamliel, that's the head of the Sanhedrin. And Amru Loi. So these Chachamim told Yochanan HaKohen, don't confuse that with Yochanan Kohen Gadol. This is a Yochanan who was a Kohen, who was a well-known scribe. Tzei Uchsoiv. And there were 3 letters that they asked him to write. One of them is connected to our topic. What should you write? Achenu b'nei Gelila ilo b'nei Gelila ariyasa. One letter was going to the north, to the brethren, to our brothers, those who live in the upper Galilee, those who live in the lower Galilee, Chevra Daf Nun Hey. That, first of all, this is how you write a letter. Shlom Chayin Yiske, may your peace increase. Today, you wish a person to be in peace because we are not in a state of peace. Somehow then they presume that they were already in a state of peace. So the bracha is, good is good, better is better, may your peace increase. Moidana Lochan, we're informing you, the Matas Man Biura, that the time of Biur is coming. So again, this happened either near Erev Pesach, the 4th or the 7th. And therefore, this is based before Rabbi Akiva, how things used to be. That Tafkun Masraya, that you should separate your maisres min ma'atone zeisa, from the vats of olives. Now, I just want to clarify something without getting into details. We learned this already together, that really the Gemara Malach of olives is way after the olives are in the vats. First, you soak the olives in the vats, and at some point, a couple of days, they become softer. Then you put them in bags, and then the bags go into the olive press, and then you kvetch them. And after you squeeze the olives, kasis lamar, that's what God is doing to all of us. Then olive oil supposedly comes out of us. Let's hope so. And then it flows into the lower holder. That's the Gemar Malacha. That's what he meant. In other words, befedish, that the people that did not even have produce that was near the Gemar Malacha stage, they wrote them a letter to remind them, process your unprocessed produce in order for it to become tevel, in order for you to separate the maisres, because all of that is included in the chiyuv of beer. Now, it's interesting that in the north, we know this, Usher had a territory in the north. Many or most of the people's agricultural work was with olives. So they mentioned olives. It didn't only mean olives, but that was probably for the roiv of the people. The same was another letter, La'achana b'nei deroima, for the Yidden that live in the south, whether they live in the upper southlands, b'nei deroima ilah, or if they live in the b'nei deroima ariyasa, or in the lower southland, that Moedina Lochain, we are informing you. Same thing, the Matas Man Biura, the time of beer is coming, and therefore, what did people do over there? They had fields of grain, even though you can say they had olives, whatever. That's what happened. Tafkun Masaraya, the same thing, that you should separate your tithes me amrei shiblaya, from the sheaves of grain. Again, also, guys, really, you don't separate it from the sheaves, right? Because after you have the sheaves, you have to gather them. Then you have to put them on the threshing floor. Then you have to thresh them. Then you have to winnow them. Then you have to do the miruach. We mean that. In other words, bring your produce to its process stage, to its gemar malacha, and now it's tevel. Now separate the trumas u'maisres and then give it to the proper recipients. So, in other words, the point of this brayso is to show you that prior to Rabbi Akiva, This was the accepted understanding of beer. And now just let's finish the Braisa. La'achana b'nei Golusa de Bavel, to our brethren that live in the diaspora, be'ikir then it wasn't Bavel. So whether you live in Bavel, they went through all the different areas, letters that went all around the world where Yidden were settled then. Ubnei Golusa the Madai, right, which will include some of Iran, Persia, Ubnei Golusa the Yavan, Greece, Vishar Galvasoin the Yisrael, and all of the rest of the diasporas of the Jewish people. Same lashon. The letter began, Shlom Chayin Yizke, may your peace increase. Moida Anah L'Chayin, just Tastam L'Chayin, if the Girsa is correct, right? Before it was Moidana L'Chayin, little nuance. Moida Anah L'Chayin, that what? The Imraya Rekichen, that the lambs are still tender. Don't forget, if you're not ma'aber, when Pesach comes, talking about millions of people have to bring a korban Pesach, which would come from lambs and from goats. But if there was a shortage of stock, we're going to go into the Rambam in a moment, that would be one of the secondary reasons, not the main reason, that would justify Beis Din deciding to add another month to the year. And the goizlaya dakikin, and the doves are still thin. Now, why doves? Because, just as an example, all of the women that gave birth, and they have to now bring the karbanos, right? And they could bring two birds. I know, an animal or a bird or two birds. And many other people that are what we call mechusrei kippurim. It was common that if you lived far away from the Beis HaMikdash, since you finished, it's amazing, b'hashgacha pratis, that's what we're learning also on the Rambam these days, to do the final step, they waited until the closest regel, the closest yontif. In other words, when Pesach came, people chaptarain. Anyways, they're going to the Beis HaMikdash. So the accumulation of all of the different people, a person is a Zav Gedoyla. They have to bring karbanis. They have to bring two birds. And many other who have to bring birds. So there has to be an abundance of birds. So if the animals that are needed for the karbanis were not in abundance, and on top of that, v'zimna, the aviva loimata, the time for the grain is in reference to barley, did not yet ripen. It's amazing. None of this was the main reason. The main reason, we're going to go into the Rambam, is that the tkufa, right, the spring equinox, cannot happen on the 16th of Nisan. That vada you're ma'aber deshana. It has to happen before that. But that's the main reason. There are secondary reasons. So they gave three of these reasons. And ushfar ba'anpoi chavayre, and therefore it became proper. This is Rabbi Gamliel as the head of the Sanhedrin. In my eyes and in the eyes of my colleagues, that moisva al shatodah, that we are adding to this year to lasan yomim 30 days. Astam lohoy, something interesting for me, that lohoy, that has to be notified to all of the Yidden. And probably it was. It's just that the first two letters, which is about biur is only if you live in the Holy Land, where you chayv to be toirim u'ma'aser. So it's not shayich to anyone other than the Yidden that lived in the Holy Land. This letter is for everyone. But it's interesting the way what happened is that it was addressed to the Jews that live in the diaspora. And I just want to quickly, I know time is going to fly, but it's Pashat Geshmak for us. So in Perek Daled, in Kiddush HaChodesh, is where the Rambam shed so much. In Bavli, the sugya was in Sanhedrin Daf Yud Aleph. But the way that Rambam puts it together, it became very clear the way it happens. Right? The Rambam begins that Shana Me'uberes it refers to intercalated year in English. It only refers to when you add a 13th month, and that is only going to be the month of Adar. And the main reason is the Rambam writes al shloisha simana ma'abrem es hashana. Shloisha simana means three factors. That's the way we're going to learn. What are the three factors? Alat kufa. Kufa means the vernal or the spring equinox, or when the sun enters Mazel Teleh. That needs to happen prior to the 16th of Nisan. Va'al ha'aviv is what we just learned in the Gemara. Aviv Pashut means we want for the barley crop to ripen. Why? Because the cardamom oimer comes from barley. And va'al peiros se'ilan, which is similar, but that's another of the Rambam. And we want we want for the trees to start blooming, because that's a siman of spring. Okay, And then the Rambam writes in Halacha Hey v'yesh sham dvarim acherim shehoya beis din ma'abrim b'shvilim b'pnei atzoyrech. Then you have secondary things. Ve'eluhein b'pnei hadrachim she'enim misukanim. Don't forget that if there was a very strong winter and the roads broke or the bridges, needed to be repaired, ve'ein ha'am yichoylum la'alois ma'abrim es hashana ad she'ifsku agsham v'yisaknu hadrachim b'pnei agsharim shenehersu v'chulei. Okay, and then he writes. It's interesting. I'm trying to see if the Rambam writes about the animals, not having enough animals for the karbanos. Yes, he does. Then he writes in Halacha Zayin, Yesh Dvarim she'ema abram b'shvilam klal. They're not even a factor, but they become a sa'ad lashana. And this is something very important in Halacha. When you write shuvas today, there is a factor, and even but then you want to have a sa'ad. A sa'ad would mean some sort.
When is the actual evil happening?
So the actual Ibur used to happen then when we were already in the month of Adar. That's the way it used to be then.
But Mishenichnas Adam Mashmin al Ashkalim to fix all the roads.
That Nishka Ferlich, that doesn't matter. I'm just telling you the way it worked. And we were Ma'aber Deshana until Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Then there were times that there were Xeris of the Romans for the Sanhedrin not to congregate. So we had an issue getting together then. And when we began to be Ma'aber Deshana earlier. That means we made that decision. But when it comes to being Ma'aber Deshana earlier, we wouldn't know then whether there is a lack of karbanos or whether there's too much rain. We didn't know that. What would we know? The main reason, Tkufa, you know. And that's the main reason. Okay, we'll leave it at that. So, okay, says the Gemara weiter. Well, the Gemara just showed us that prior to Rabbi Akiva's coming, this was the commonly accepted understanding of beer. Now the Mishnah said a story. So Rabban, Gamliel, and the Zakenim were in the boat, and beer. It's very difficult, the whole story. A Talmud Chacham doesn't leave his produce untithed. The whole thing is difficult. That's what happened. And the question is, since we explained, beer doesn't only mean to separate, which you could do far away. Beer means to see to it that the trumais and maisres go to its recipients. How do you make that kinyan? So that was what the Mishnah says. They rented land. Land can be rented with kinyan kesef. You don't have to be near the land. And then either kinyan agav or kinyan chatzir. Now I know that Rabbi Mendel mentioned yesterday, hold on, even by kinyan chatzir, don't you have to have the owner standing nearby the chatzir? All of this is the sugya in Bava Metzia. There's a lot of details there that are not mentioned here. And actually, because of the issue of them not being near their chatzir, that's why in the Gemara there, they explain this not to be kinyan chatzir, to be kinyan agav. The Gemara here doesn't even go into it. Whatever we're going to learn over here is going to be relevant whether the metaltalin, in this case the Trumas Umaisris, actually was transferred to its recipients through Kinyan Chatzar or through Kinyan Agav. The Gemara is going to bring up a bomb question. So, quoting the Mishnah, Isur Shani Yasad Lamed, this is regarding Ma'aser Ishain, Nasan Lo Yeshua, we just learned Rabbi Shua ben Chananya was a Levi. So, first of all, we had over there Rabbi Elazar ben Azari, he was in the ship. So the Gemara initially wants to go back to the sugya that we learned in the last 2 days, last 2 dafim. Are you allowed to give Ma'aser Ishain to a kohen? So the Gemara says, Hada Amra, proof from this story that you don't give Ma'aser to the kahuna. Because if you can give the Ma'aser Rishon to a kohen, then they would have, then Rabbi Gamliel would have given his Ma'aser Ishain to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Why? But you can also give it to a Levi, because don't forget, the Rashi Elio says, the Mishnah said, that when the Rabbi Shua ben Chananya got his Ma'aser Ishain, now you had a new problem. For who? For Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. Now he has to give the Trumas Ma'aser to a kohen. Who did he give it to? To Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He had to make another kinyan with the land, with the kinyan Kesef, and then kinyan Agav, kinyan Chatzir. It would have been a lot simpler to give everything to a kohen, because you're not there. Only make one kinyan with the kohen. Yes, the kohen has to separate from the Ma'aser Ishain Trumas Ma'aser. He can make that separation verbally, but then there will be no need for you to make a new kinyan, because he keeps it. He got it. That's the Havamina. And the Gemara says, no, Shanyi, it's not a raya. Since Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya was there, the Rashi Ilya writes something beautiful. He actually writes that it's better to distribute your Trumas U'Maiseres to more people, not to less people. So since there was a Levi there, maybe he held the way we learned that you could give it to a Kohen. The sheet of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah before he retracted. Many other Amoraim, we had all of these different opinions. Aber, since you had a Kohen and a Levi, it's better to distribute your Trumas u'Maasros to more people. So it says that Asher Ilyo, 6 lines in the bottom in the left column, since you are able to give the Truma to one, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the Ma'aserishan to Rabbi Shua ben Chanania, that's better than giving it to one person. Asks the Gemara, here's the main question. Amar Rabbi Chanania, now I want to say by heart what the Gemara doesn't say here, but what the Gemara verbalizes in the Bavli. There was a kinyan known as kinyan Chalipin. Really, the lumdus of kinyan Chalipin works different than other kinyanim, which is really part of what's running the sugya. I can word it simply. Why not do something simpler than doing something more complex? You can word it that way. We are all familiar with kinyan Chalipin. In other words, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would have given Rabbi Gamliel a sudar, not even a gift. Rabbi Gamliel would have lifted it up, and in exchange, he's giving him his Truma Gedoyla. You don't have to have land. You don't have to do it Agav Chatzir. You don't have the questions we're going to have. So Chalipin is an easier kinyan. And in the Bavli, the Gemara is really asking it in that direction. Like, why not do that which is simpler? In the Yerushalmi, we're not asking that. Maybe according to the Yerushalmi, the kinyan Kesev or kinyan Meshicha is superior to Chalipin. If that's an option, that's why you do it. I'm going to say a few words at the end of the sugya, what we have in the Bavli. The problem that the Yerushalmi will focus on is not that Chalipin is better or easier, is that this kinyan should not work. Amar Rabbi Chananya, Shahada Amram, Shahoya Rabbi Gamliel Tzarech Lizakois. He should have done the zikoi. Zikoi means Chalipin. But why should he have done the Chalipin the way the Gemara is going to formulate it? Because what he did not work. Now let me go into a prat. What I'm saying now is equally whether kinyan Chatzar, whether kinyan Agav. If I have my keli on your land, the fact that the item is in my keli, even though my keli is on your land, the item is not viewed to be on your land, it's viewed to be in my keli. In our case, what did Rabbi Gamliel do? He rented the land. Let's go to Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, right, for the Ma'aserishan. The presumption of the Gemara is that when people have produce, it's in a keli. The keli still belong to Rabbi Gamliel. So what good is it that through the kinyan of Kesef, Rabbi Shua ben Chananya and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and then Rabbi Kiva the Gabbai Tzedakah, that they acquired the land, the fact that the produce was still in the keli of Rabbi Gamliel, it interrupts, it gets in the way of the kinyan Chatzir, if we're going to learn kinyan Agav of kinyan Agav. Now, if it's not true regarding kinyan Agav, then it must be that the Yerushalmi held that the whole thing is kinyan Chatzir. And the solution for that will be is that it must be it was not in the keli. Let's read it inside. But the Mishnah did not say that he rented the keli. And for that, you have to make a kinyan. That step the Mishnah should not have omitted. Now, different girsois. Guys, daf nun hey, we're going with this girso. This is part of his question. Why should they have done Chalipin? Not because Chalipin is simpler, which it is. Let's learn that Chalipin, according to the Yerushalmi, is a inferior type of kinyan. But you know why? Because what he did not work. Forget about that Rabbi Yeshua rented the land. Let's say that the produce was mamish in the house of Rabbi Yeshua, which is the same thing. But the produce is in a kupa. In a kupa that's chashuv, it's in a basket. And V'oimen and Gamliel tells Rabbi Yeshua, Yiskel Meiser Shabbat, listen to me. The Meiser Rishon that's in the basket, you, because a kinyan chatzir, your chatzir should be koine. Klum, asa, achi, yisayim. Would it help prior to him being Messiah? Don't ask. The word Messiah literally would mean that he has to articulate where in the basket is the Maiserishon. I want you to know that this is elaborated in the Bavli, that in itself also would not help, especially by King and Chatzin. So either the Gemara is being very, very general, right? Or, according to the Yerushalmi, that if you specify that the Maiserishon is the tzfoinoi of the Kupa, then maybe King and Chatzin would work, not mentioned in the Mishnah. So the problem is that since, let's speak it generally we're speaking very good. Since the presumption is that Rabban Gamliel had his untithed produce in a box, in a basket, in a keli, that gets in the way of the kinyan that he made. So for that, the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yeshua, it must be, you're right, I agree with your premise. That Rabban Gamliel did not have it in any type of kupa. He had it laying on the ground in a storage room. And since Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, they rented the land, now you have a bona fide king and chatzir. And if this poses a kasha for king and agav, now the king and agav is going to work. I just want to add the words that we have in the Gemara, because in the Gemara in Bavli Bava Metzia Daf Yud Aleph, the Gemara is not happy with this. That's not enough there, because still Chalipin is a simpler step. You don't have to do 2 steps. Do 1 step. Do king and Chalipin. And the Gemara says, these are the words of the Gemara, that king and Chalipin is a kinyan connected to Mekach Memkar. There is an exchange. And since the matonois, trumas umaisris, the Torah uses the words matnois kohuna, nesinok siv buhu. That's what the Gemara says. You cannot use Chalipin for giving trumas umaisris. The fact that the Yerushalmi doesn't bring that over here, I'm saying this by presumption, because I remember that there's a big sugya in the Achronim, Rab Chaim, who explains that according to many, which will be the Yerushalmi, kinyan Chalipin is viewed as an inferior type of kinyan. It doesn't work like other kinyan. If we're going to go with that, then the Gemara doesn't have to explain why they didn't do Chalipin. If there is another option, do the other option. If you view Chalipin to be just as good as, then the kasha is Chalipin is simpler. For that, you have to farenfer. Chalipin could be simpler, but since Chalipin is the way of exchange, because there is an exchange, we don't do exchanges, even though the kohen is not paying for it, even though the Levi is not paying for it. But the Levi will have to give the gartel. I want to make it clear: when you do a kinyan Chalipin, you're not you're not giving away the sudar. You keep the sudar. You know, a Rav does a kinyan, right, when you give him permission to sell your chametz on your behalf. So you give him that permission, not just by signing a document, you do all the kinyanim. You sign a document, some people shake a hand, and on top of that, you do a kinyan. The Rav gives a yamelka or a gartel. He's not giving a yamelka to every person who's selling the chametz. You lift it and you take it back. But still, there is that exchange. Okay, that's Gavaldik. So the final topic of today, and we're going to go a little bit into Daf Nun Vav. We have time because tomorrow's Daf is words-wise large. The topic is discussed, let's say its headquarters is in Bavli Gittin Daf Chav Gimel. Mi she'ena b'toiras, like we gave an example, that an Eved cannot become a shliach to be mekabel, a get on behalf of a woman who's to be divorced, because since an Eved is not b'toiras gittin v'kedushin, there's no marriage. We're speaking about an Eved Kanani. He's not shaykh in that Torah. If someone is unable to be part of whatever legal transaction is happening, he can never be a shliach for that transaction. We're going to see that there are 2 ways of applying this rule. One more limited and one more broad, and that's subject to a machloikes amoraim. This is not the only place we learn about this machloikes, but the names of the amoraim over here are special. So Ispalgun, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi. I'm sorry, Rabbi Drifa Amar, Ispalgun Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yos. And who do we have? There are other names. I have to just find it. That in other places, this machlokes is b'shem other, or one of these 2 are not, whatever it is. Let's go with our Gemara. Machlokes Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Yos. Chadamar, that means we forgot who said which one, but at least one of these two said that the way it works is Haroi litoil zoicha. It's very, very limiting. So let's use the example of where they argued. They argued by peya. Who is able to acquire peya? An ani. So what happens if an ani is not feeling well, but he wants to get peya? So he sends a shliach to acquire peya on his behalf. Or if you want to use the principle of mizaken la'adam shaloi b'fanav, someone wants to pick it up. Yeah, I know that there is an ani in bed. He can't go physically and do it. I want to do it, acquire it for him. I'm not an ani. Am I able to acquire it for the ani? So we said you have to be betroidas, getting the kedushin. You can argue, I am betroidas peya because I can give peya. So do you say that betroidas means you're receiving it for an ani? Who can be a shliach? Only someone who can receive it for themselves. That's the most limiting. That's one opinion. That only haroi litoil, only someone who can acquire it is able to be zoicha on behalf of someone else. The fact that you are betroidas peya because you are able to leave peya, that's not enough. So it's very limiting. But the other one of these two say, no, you're right. Like an Eved is not betroidas gittin the kedushin. He's not shaykh to marriage. He can't give a get, he can't receive a get, he can't give kedushin, he's not shaykh in any direction. So an Eved cannot be a shliach. But over here, if I want to acquire pay on behalf of an ani, even though I'm not ro'ui litoil, but I'm ro'ui litain. Beautiful. It's enough. In other words, a rich person who can give can become a shliach on behalf of an ani to receive pay.
Now, still for sure a poor person also, right?
For sure, yeah, a poor person, everyone. Yeah, very good. Now I want to say the following. I just want to right away bring it back over here. I want to know whether a non-kohen who can give truma, can a non-kohen become a shliach on behalf of a kohen to receive truma? That's really where we're going into. That's mamash this machloikas. Betoiras truma, yeah, because I'm ro'ui litain, but a non-kohen is not ro'ui litoil. And Danny, what you said, the Gemara just elaborates clear, very clear. Man the Amar, and they have to get the right version. Haroi litain. If it's enough to be betoiras by the fact that you are able to give, then Danny, for you, kol shchein ro'oi litoil. Everyone agrees that an ani. That if you're that an ani can be makabel, because not only, by the way, even though an ani is not ro'ui litain, doesn't matter. That doesn't bother me. He's even more. He's ro'ui litoil, and that's what he's serving at. He's a shliach to be noitel on behalf of another ani. However, uman de amar that ro'ui litoil, that's the one who excludes more from the shlichus. Then we say, hol litain, even if it's someone who's roi litain, nevertheless, loi, you cannot serve as a shliach. So now, let's see how far we can get before we come back to Meiser Sheni, before we come back to a non-coin, before we come back to our whole topic here. This in itself, it appears that there are certain Mishnayos that set this clear. Don't forget, this is a machlekes amoyroim. This is not a machlekes tanoim. Whoever the Amoraim were, right? You can't argue with the Mishnah. And it appears, we're going to see how far we're going to get, that from Mishnayos, that it's clear one side. So let's begin. And always, Kederach Yerushalmi, they quote two lines and they expect you to know the rest of the Mishnah. Hamas Nisa, but there is a Beferish Mishnah, Pligal Mando Amaroi Litel Zoichem, right? The one who's more limiting, the one who says that to be a Shliach, you have to be not Betoidas, general. If you're receiving a peya, you have to be roy litel peya yourself. Only a kohen can receive truma on behalf of another kohen. It can't be. Why? So the Tanina, the first kasha is from a Mishnah in Gittin, in Bavli Daf Samach Beis. The Mishnah says, "Ha'omer, hiskabel getzel leishti." Right? We just learned this not that long ago. Really, there are three types of shluchim. Really. We're not going to focus on the shliach lohoiva. we're going to focus on the shliach lehoilacha versus the shliach like Kabbalah, right? It's very simple. The husband who sends a shliach lehoilacha, the shliach cannot be more than the mishaleach. Just like the mishaleach only divorces his wife when he puts the get in her hand, the nasan biyada. If he changes his mind prior to that, he can retract. Doesn't give her the get. Even though the mishaleach gave a get to a shliach lehoilacha, so what? She's not divorced. The shliach is like the mishaleach. When is she migoreshes? When the shliach lehoilacha puts the get in the hand of the ex-wife to be. So even if the shliach, the husband, calls the shliach, tells the shliach, hiskabel get zele ishti, he uses the words, he's sending a shliach, but he calls the shliach, I want you to accept this get on behalf of my wife. So what? That he used those words doesn't mean anything. He's not the wife, he's him. The most, shliach shaladam kamoisai, mamish, okay, but not more than kamoisai. Or in the normal, hoylach get zele ishti, in both of these cases. So the Mishnah says, since the shliach is like the mishaleach, which means that until when she receives the get, she's not megodeshes. So imrotz Allah hachzir, yachzir, he can retract. What the Gemara, again, this is typical of the Yerushalmi. The Mishnah continues over there. In contrast, that if a woman appoints the shliach, and she tells the shliach, hiskabel get zeh, accept this get for me. So now, when the husband puts the get in the hand of her shliach lekabbalah, that's what the Mishnah says. That if she was the one that appointed the shliach, once he gave the shliach the get, there's no retraction because she's already migoreshes. The way the Mishnah formulates this, it sounds like we're speaking about the same man, the same shliach. If he was appointed by the husband, then prior to the act of putting the get in her hand, then he could retract. If she was the one that appointed this shliach, once the husband gives the get to the shliach, then the husband can no longer retract. Now let me ask you a question. I know that both a man and or a woman can be a shliach, but what shliach is the Mishnah talking about? We're talking about one person. Now let me ask you a question. A man betrayed us giving a get. A man doesn't accept a get. A woman is betrayed us receiving a get. According to the Amoida that says that this rule, that for you to be a shliach, you have to be betrayed us. And according to the Amoida, whichever one, Rabbi Yirmiyah or Rabbi Yossi, no, it has to be mamish the same thing. It should come out according to this, that only a man should be able to be a shliach lehilacha, only a woman should be a shliach lekabbalah. And how can the Mishnah speak about the same person that if he was appointed, he or she was appointed by the husband, the rule is one way. If that person was appointed by the wife, the rule is otherwise. It can't be. It's not even shayach. You can't have. It has to be two different. Why? Because it has to be two different genders. If only an ani can be mekabel, then a wife should only be able to appoint a female shliach lekabbalah, and a husband should only be able to appoint a male shliach leilach. That's the Gemara discussion. Great. Answers the Gemara, you're wrong. There is a scenario where a man can accept a get. A man can accept a get. What is that? The Torah grants a father jurisdiction over his minor daughter, both to be mekabel her kedushin and to be mekabel her get. So a man is betrayed us being mekabel a get. So the Mishnah in Gittin is speaking about a man, and a man, even according to this Amoida, can function on either side of the equation. Answers the Gemara, no, you're wrong. Meaning a man can be on both sides of this. Shkein roi hu lekabel get bitoy. This is Gavaldi. Okay, we have another minute, so we're gonna chap one more. I just started daf nun because tomorrow is a very long daf. Another kasha weiter from Gittin and Bavli daf Yudalef. Very similar. The Mishnah doesn't elaborate. So the Mishnah, another Mishnah says, "Omer ten get zel ishti." Okay, or ushtar shichru zela avdi. This is what a person says. Same thing, right? A shliach lehoilacha. So the Mishnah says that even though the man gave it to the shliach, if he wants to retract, it can retract. When can he not retract? If the document came to the hand of the wife, or if it came to the hand of the slave. And then the Mishnah writes over there in Daf Yud Aleph in Bavli that the Divrei Rab Meir. But according to the Chachamim, when it comes to Ashtar Shichrur, when it comes to listen to my words, when it comes to Ashtar Shichrur, you're emancipating your slave. If the owner put a shtar in the hands of a shliach lehoilacha, the eved is meshuchred. Why? Because since mizakin lo adam shaloi b'fanav, buy a get havla mesav tandu mila mesav armulu. No matter how bad, Chazal say that. When it comes to emancipation, that's the machlokes avda behefked and nichalei or not. But let's go with the shita that the eved wants to be emancipated. So even though the shliach was, so to say, appointed by the master, the chachamim hold b'derech memela, the shliach is representing the eved, and therefore he cannot. Now, I want to ask you a question. We're speaking about a shliach who's either giving a get to a woman. Who can do that? An eved cannot do that. Why not? We just quoted, because an eved is not betrayed getting the kedushin b'chlal on either side. So the shliach, the shliach, that's for the first part of the Mishnah 10 gets al ishti, speaking about a yid, not about an eved. How can a free man be a shliach lekabbalah to an eved? He's not betrayed us. Now, a free man is betrayed us because he can emancipate a slave. So according to that moida, that doesn't limit it that much. It works, same kasha. But if to be a shliach, you have to be on the same exact side, how can the Mishnah, it sounds like we're speaking about the same person, either as a shliach for a get or as a shliach for a shtar shichrur, and the chachamim say that that person is also automatically a shliach to be mekabel the shtar on behalf of the eved. How can he serve as a shliach lekabbalah? So the Gemara says, you know who the shliach is? The shliach is an eved. Must be. An eved can be a shliach to be mekabel a get on behalf of someone else. Shekein hu roi lekabel shtar shichrur roi. Now the problem is the Mishnah put together two cases. So asks the Gemara, we're going to go with the version. Veho eved roi lohoilach as a get? No. So the Gemara says, Enachanami, who says we're speaking about the same shliach? Answers the Gemara that psar, you have to interpret that the Mishnah is litzedodin himas nisin. Even though the Mishnah put it together, you're giving it to a free Jew. He's giving it to a Yid. When the Mishnah says, Ushtar, Shechuz Elavdi, we're speaking about an Eved. And that's the way this will not refute.